And of course, GFCIs can come in the form of a overcurrent device, or let me get my pointer up here. Yeah, overcurrent device or a receptacle, either one. And the code really doesn't, especially when it comes to dwelling units, the code doesn't specify one over the other. You typically see more of this, your GFCI devices, in the form of a receptacle, simply because they're cheaper than an overcurrent device. But the code really doesn't distinguish between the two. What are we talking about here? A GFCI is a device intended for the protection of vacuum cleaners. Is that what that says? That doesn't say that at all, does it? What are we trying to protect here? People. Intended for the protection of personnel. Now, if it protects the vacuum cleaner along the way, fantastic. But that's not my goal. My goal is to protect people. Functions de-energize a circuit or a portion thereof within an established period of time when the current to ground exceeds those for a Class A GFCI device. Now, an NEC informational note there tells us that a Class A GFCI device, and there's different classifications of GFCI devices, Class A, Class B, Class E, and so on. Class A is intended to protect people, and it has a tripping range of between 4 to 6 milliamps of current. And that's all based on the human body and the let-go threshold of a human. The average male can withstand, and all of this is based on weights and heights and sizes and all. And the average male, and when I say let-go threshold, I mean if you were to get hung in some current, at a certain point, you cannot voluntarily let go. You're hung in that current. You cannot let go, and that's what they call the let go threshold. At a certain point, your body is going to muscle contraction, heart palpitation, loss of vision. Your heart's going to stop at a certain point. And the let go threshold for a human, the average male, I probably am bigger than the average male, but the let go threshold for the average male is about 16 milliamps of current. 17, 18, 20 milliamps of current, you're in big trouble. You're getting ready to be electrocuted. Again, muscle contraction, heart palpitation, things like that are getting ready to occur. The average female can withstand about 10, 11 milliamps of current. Now, to determine these let-go threshold, they didn't go around shocking a bunch of kids, but they took the average weights and sizes of the people they did do the experiments on and brought it down to the average size of a child and determined that the let-go threshold for a child is about 5 milliamps of current. So that's why a GFCI device, a Class A GFCI device, is set to trip between 4 to 6 milliamps of current. If it was a device that didn't react until you got past your let-go threshold, what are we accomplishing? I mean, what are we trying to do here? We're trying to protect people. And so we have to have a product that can detect a loss of current before we reach that let-go threshold. And that's why a Class A GFCI device is set to trip between 4 to 6 milliamps of current. Your GFCI devices are required to be installed in a readily accessible location. When this rule first came into the code, and of course I represent the electrical inspectors on the code panels, and I was concerned about this rule because when we're out there looking at an electrical final, the furniture's not in place, is it? So I was concerned that, how are we going to, as the inspectors, how are we going to determine if I use a GFCI receptacle, in other words, and I choose to put it, on the wall in a bedroom or something, how am I going to know what the homeowner is going to do as far as placing furniture in front of it or not. So, you know, it goes back to the old saying, you're an inspector, you're not an expector. So all you can do is just look at what you see in front of you on the final and go by that. We have lots and lots of GFCI requirements pertaining to dwelling units, bedrooms, or excuse me, not bedrooms, bathrooms, garages, kitchens, sink areas, laundry areas, and so on. You got a pretty good list there. We'll take a look at most of these as we move along here. There's some GFCI devices installed. I think what impressed me as much as anything when I took this photo was the circuit directory there. The electrician, boy, did a great job in labeling those circuits, if you ask me. There's a picture of a condor. How many of you have ever seen a condor in person? It's a rare occurrence, right? How many of you have ever seen a installed GFCI overcurrent device, especially at a dwelling unit? You don't see a lot of these. There's nothing in the code that says you should use a receptacle versus this or vice versa. It's just simply that the receptacles are cheaper, less expensive than these right here. So that's why you don't see them a whole lot, especially at dwelling units. How does a GFCI function? What a GFCI is doing, particularly in a 120 volt circuit, you've got a hot conductor going out to a load, and you've got a neutral conductor coming back. Remember that receptacle we saw on that patio early this morning? We were trying to determine if it was a damp or wet location. Remember that? Let's say that's what that load right here is. Let's say we plug in an electric smoker or something like that, and that electric smoker draws 6.8 amps of current, whatever it pulls. So when we turn that smoker on, how much current do we have flowing on that hot conductor? 6.8 amps of current. How much do we have coming back on that neutral in a 120 volt circuit? 6.8 amps of current. Inside of a GFCI, be it a overcurrent device or a receptacle, what you would find if you cut it away, you would find a CT transformer, a current transformer that's reading the current going passing over these conductors right here. And a GFCI is basically an adding machine. That's what it is. It's adding up the current going out and adding up the current coming back. And that better equal the same thing or pretty close to it, or this thing is going to sense it and send a signal up here to trip the overcurrent device. If we start losing current past 4 to 6 milliamps of current. What's a milliamp? 1/1000th of an amp. We're not talking a lot of current right here to have an effect on the human body. So we've got this electric smoker out here that pulls 6.8 amps of current. Suddenly, for some reason, we have a short in the cord or whatever, but we're losing current out in the field. Matter of fact, we've got circulating currents out onto the frame of that electric smoker. And so we've got 6.8 amps of current coming out here, but we only have 5.5 coming back. That donut right there would sense that, trip the overcurrent device, and stop sending current out into the field to keep us from getting electrocuted. If the difference in current from that hot conductor to that neutral conductor is greater than 4 to 6 milliamps of current, that sensor is going to sense that and trip the overcurrent device. That's how GFCI functions. Now, for the 17 code, 17 NEC, 18 IRC, and this is changed for the next edition of the code. I'll just tell you that. But for right now, it says all. Guys, What does that word right there mean? What does all mean in your area? In Texas, you know what that means? It means everybody but Carla. No, that's not what all means, everybody. All 125 volt single phase 15-20 ampere receptacles that are located in the following areas shall. The code says shall. Anytime you see that word shall, your options just went out the window. Shall be GFCI protected. Bathrooms, garages, outdoors. We have an exception there for outdoors. Crawl spaces, unfinished basements, kitchens, sink areas, bathtub and shower stalls, laundry areas, kitchen dishwashers, boathouses, boat hoist, electrically heated floors. So we've got a lot of provisions for GFCI requirements, and I ran through that list pretty quick. We'll take a look at some of these individually here in just 1 second. 2021 IRC, 2020 NEC, what I say a while ago, all 125 volt, 15 through 20 ampere receptacles, right? Receptacle outlets. Look what it's changed to when you get to the next edition of the code. 125 volt through 250 volt calls for GFCI protection. And notice that there's not an amperage rating here. In the previous edition, we were limited to 15 and 20 ampere 125 volt receptacle outlets. This one, when we get to the next edition of the code, 125 volt through 250 volt with no amperage limitation there. So it would apply to 30 amp, 40 amp, 50 amp, and so on. So what does that mean when you get to the next edition of the code? A 240 volt dryer receptacle, 30 amp rated dryer receptacle would now call for GFCI protection under the 2020 NEC, 2021 IRC. Now, that's not the edition that we're studying today, but again, I just wanted to give you guys a heads up as to what's coming in the next edition of the code. I apologize to you guys. I keep looking over to the side. I'm looking at your faces over here. My camera's actually right here, but I'm looking over here to see your faces. So I apologize if I keep looking to the side here. Bathrooms, all. Now, first of all, you would think this would be pretty simple, wouldn't you? But we got to know, our definition is important to us. Everybody shake your head, yes. We have a definition of a bathroom in Chapter 35 of the IRC, or in Article 100 of the NEC. So in order for us to have a bathroom, look at this definition. It has to be a room that includes a basin with one or more. Is that what that says? Or did I just make up some code? I just made up code, didn't I? That doesn't say room at all, does it? Wonder why that doesn't say room. It doesn't say room so that I'm not confined to that or that. It says area to where when it comes to GFCI protection, I can take in this whole area, not just one room. That's very important, okay? An area that includes a basin. Guys, if you don't have a basin, you don't have a bathroom according to the electrical code, okay? You got to have a basin, got to have a sink with one or more of the following: toilet, tub, urinal, bidet, or similar plumbing fixture. So you go out to a job site and you look over here and you see a toilet, and you look over here and you see a basin. Guess where you're standing? You're standing right smack in the middle of a bathroom. And all 125 volt, 15-20 ampere receptacles located in that area would call for GFCI protection. Only the ones that serve a basin. Is that what the code says? Doesn't say that at all, does it? Any 125 volt, 15-20 ampere receptacle in this area would call for GFCI protection. What if we remodeled that bathroom and put our laundry equipment in there? Now there's my 20 amp required laundry circuit. But where's it located at? in an area defined as what? A bathroom. That receptacle would require GFCI protection. The laundry circuit would require GFCI protection because of its location. That's another thing about GFCI protection. You can compare it to real estate. When do you need GFCI protection? What's the key condition for GFCI protection? Location, location, location. I can't tell you how many people call me and say, Keith, I know somewhere in the code it says that a washing machine requires GFCI protection, but I can't find that. Why can't I find that? You can't find that because the code doesn't say that. The receptacle that you plug in that washing machine to is required to be GFCI protected, not because you plugged the washing machine into it, but because why? Its location. It's located where? In a laundry area. So now, under the 17 code 18 IRC, that 30 amp dryer receptacle right there is not required to be GFCI protected. Why? Because it's above 125 volts and it's above 15 or 20 ampere rated. But remember what we saw about 3 slides ago? When you get to the 20 NEC 21 IRC, it's going to be what? 125 volt through 250 volt rated receptacles with no amperage rating. That would limit it. So that dryer receptacle right there, when you get to the next edition of the code, would call for GFCI protection as well. Current code, all 125 volt, 15, 20 ampere receptacles located in the bathroom require GFCI protection. So yes. 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 Probably over here. Yes. Garages. All of these receptacles would call for GFCI protection in a garage, with that one, the dryer not having to be GFCI protected under this edition of the code, but the next edition, even that one would be required to be GFCI protected, wouldn't it? Even these receptacles up in the ceiling call for GFCI protection. Where they located? They're located where? In a garage area. So we used to have some language that said only those receptacles that were accessible from direct grade access, but that went away years ago. So yes, all of these receptacles would require GFCI protection. Any of these 125 volt, 15, 20 ampere receptacles located in a garage would call for GFCI protection. And that one. Outdoor receptacles, all 125 volt, 15, 20 ampere receptacles. There's one exception here, and that one exception is for de-icing and snow melting equipment. But there's 2 conditions to it. The receptacle would have to be not readily accessible and dedicated for de-icing and snow melting equipment in that roof line right there. Other than that one exception, all of these receptacles would call for GFCI protection. I've got a receptacle at a 2-story building located in the overhang. It's 20 feet in the air. Does that call for GFCI protection? Everybody shake your head, yes. I'm going to use that one time a year for Christmas lights or something, but yes, if it's an outdoor receptacle, it still calls for GFCI protection, regardless of its height above grade or whatever. Our GFCI devices, they come in all shapes, forms, and fashions. This one is a weather resistant, tamper resistant, decorative GFCI receptacle. So we got a lot of stuff going on right there in that one. The reason I say it's tamper resistant because it's easy to tell with those shutters right there, right? If I have a crawl space, if the crawl space is at or below grade level, then all the receptacles in that area would require GFCI protection. There's even a rule that's not but a one code cycle old. In a crawl space, even the lighting outlets are required to be GFCI protected. The lighting outlets that don't exceed 120 volts. This all had to do with some fatalities that occurred with someone backing out of a crawl space on his hands and knees and backed into one of these open incandescent bulbs. And the bulb broke and he came in contact with these filaments here and electrocuted him. So even the lighting outlets, as I said, are required to be GFCI protected in a crawl space. Unfinished basements. In the 17 code 18 IRC, the unfinished portion of a basement is required to have at least one receptacle outlet. And that one, of course, is required to be GFCI protected. When you get to the next edition of the code, there was a pretty significant change. It now encompasses basements. It doesn't say anything about a unfinished basement. Panel 2 got a lot of public comments for the 2020 code cycle asking them to define what an unfinished basement was. And boy, they went back and forth on that, and they really never could center on an agreed upon definition. So they finally just said, hey, even if you finish out the basement, don't you still have the same hazardous conditions that might call for GFCI protection? And they agreed with that. And so when you get to the 2021 IRC, even if you finish the basement out, like a game room or something here, the receptacles in that area would call for GFCI protection. All receptacles in a kitchen require GFCI protection. Is that true? That's not true, is it? Only those receptacles that serve a kitchen countertop would require GFCI protection. Now, you got to be careful with that because the next rule that we'll look at talks about sinks. And so that receptacle right there behind that refrigerator is not required to be GFCI protected because why? It doesn't serve a countertop. Can I GFCI protect that? Sure, but I'm not required to GFCI protect it. But if that receptacle right there happened to fall within 6 feet of that sink right there, then yes, it would call for GFCI protection. To determine whether you need GFCI protection, you're going to take your measurement from the top inside edge of the sink without piercing a floor, wall, ceiling, fixed barrier, or passing through a door, doorway, or window. And there was a change there for the next edition of the code as well. Dishwashers require GFCI protection. The branch circuit to a dishwasher, a kitchen dishwasher. There was a change here in this edition of the code, the 17 NEC 18 IRC, trying to get GFCI protection for that receptacle right there on the back side of a kitchen area. You got a kitchen sink right here, and that receptacle right there is going to be on a general lighting circuit, not a small appliance branch circuit, because that's a receptacle that doesn't serve what? A kitchen, pantry, dining room, nook, similar area. So that receptacle would be on a general lighting circuit. And now these receptacles that are on the back side right here serving the countertops, yes, those are going to be GFCI protected. But that one's not required to be GFCI protected until this change right here for sinks. Prior to this edition of the code, when I say this edition, the 17 NEC 18 IRC, you had to have GFCI protection for sinks, but you had a parentheses behind that that said other than the kitchen sink, because it was felt like the kitchen sinks or the kitchen area receptacles were already covered by the requirements we just saw a while ago, but that would not cover that receptacle right there, would it? Right there. So at E3902.7 or 2108A7 in the NEC, that parentheses other than the kitchen sink was removed to where it would apply to every sink, regardless if it was a kitchen or bathroom or utility room or whatever, trying to get GFCI protection for that receptacle right there, based on some fatalities that had occurred with people plugging in stuff right here and it getting knocked into that sink because that one was not GFCI protected. So under the current code that we're looking at today, if that receptacle right there is within 6 feet as the crow flies of that sink, then this would require GFCI protection, even if it's on a general lighting circuit, which it probably is. Top inside edge of the sink, in other words, the shortest path a cord could take from the receptacle itself to the top inside edge. If that measurement right there is less than 6 feet, then that would require GFCI protection. Here's a typical wet bar sink, utility room sink. Now, we've had changes here to say that we need GFCI protection in a laundry area, regardless of the presence of that sink or not. But in previous editions of the code, you know, any receptacle within 6 feet of that sink, like that one, or that one, or that one, would require GFCI protection. But now, just because it's in a laundry area, all of these receptacles would call for GFCI protection. And we'll look at that here in just a little bit. With the changes that encompassed all sinks, and in an effort to get receptacles like this, to ensure that a receptacle under a kitchen sink is, or a laundry sink or whatever it is GFCI protected, for the 2020 NEC 2021 IRC, you can see that the term door or doorways was removed to make it possible to measure through a doorway to achieve GFCI protection. So you might even have a bedroom receptacle. If that receptacle lands within 6 feet as the crow flies of that sink right there, then even that bedroom receptacle right there would call for GFCI protection when you get to the next edition of the NEC. We have to have GFCI protection on all of the receptacles located within 6 feet of a bathtub or shower stall. And so you might say to yourself, well, wait a minute, Keith, I thought we covered that when we looked at the GFCI requirements for a bathroom. Well, remember what our definition of a bathroom was. Remember that? What did it say? It said we had to have a basin, and then we had to have one or the other: toilet, tub, shower, urinal, bidet. Well, I've got 2 basins here and a toilet. So by definition, what is this? It's a bathroom. So I would have GFCI protection requirements right here. But look at this area over here. I've got a tub and a shower and a makeup table with no sink. So by definition, this is not a bathroom over here. And so without this change in the code calling for a receptacle within 6 feet of a tub or shower space, that receptacle right there at this makeup table would not have been required to be GFCI protected. Number one, it's not even required to be there, period. But if you chose to put that receptacle there, and why would you not put a receptacle there? You know, if it's a makeup table where you're going to be plugging in, you know, curling irons and you know, makeup mirrors and all kinds of stuff. But there was nothing in the code that drove that to be GFCI protected. until this requirement right here came into the last code cycle.
Keith, really quick, if that wall between that tub, that little stub wall there, if that went clear to the ceiling,
It does.
make a separation,
No,
that wouldn't qualify as a wall separation from the
no,
tub
no.
to the.
You take your measurement as the crow flies, shortest path a cord could take. And if that receptacle right there lands, and it talks about the tub or shower space, it doesn't say the tub or shower itself. So the tub or shower space would be that right there.
Okay.
So if I can reach that from that receptacle, and that receptacle is within 6 feet of that, that would call for GFCI protection.
Okay, thank you.
This is our laundry area requirement. And again, this hadn't been in the code forever. Maybe this is the second code cycle I think it's been in the code. And it calls for GFCI protection in a laundry area. Whereas in the past, without this requirement right here, the dependence on GFCI protection was dependent on whether or not a sink was present or not. But that's not the case now. If it's a laundry area, then these receptacles are going to require GFCI protection. The 11 code 12 IRC would not call for GFCI protection right here because there wasn't a sink. But under today's code, where it just simply says all the receptacles within a laundry area. Now, the laundry area is not defined. It will be in the next edition of the code, but it's not defined. It's one of those things that, I know it when I see it type of thing. But yes, this is a laundry area, and that receptacle right there, the laundry circuit, that receptacle would call for GFCI protection. And under the 20 NEC 21 IRC, even that receptacle, that dryer receptacle, would call for GFCI protection. The next edition of the code will address indoor damp or wet locations. We didn't have that prior. Now we had that at commercial areas other than dwelling unit areas, but we didn't have it in dwelling units. So if you had a indoor, now if it's outdoors, we have that covered, but not indoors. Damp or wet location, who's going to determine if it's a damp or wet location? Authority having jurisdiction. What could that be? A mud room, where maybe you clean your pets when they come in or something, and the AHJ could consider that perhaps a damp location or something, or maybe you even have a designated area where you actually wash your pets down, and it could even be considered a wet location indoors. Those receptacles in that area, when you get to the next edition of the code, will call for GFCI protection. Boat hoist. Now this one, up until this time, we've talked about receptacle outlets needing GFCI protection. Notice what this one says. Outlets. So even if you hardwire a boat hoist, it would call for GFCI protection. Whether it was cord and plug connected or hardwired, it would call for GFCI protection. Dishwashers call for GFCI protection. Today's dishwashers have a lot of electronics involved with them. I've got a dishwasher that I could run through a cycle right now. Sitting here with my smartphone, I could make that dishwasher, run through a cycle if I chose to do that. And so there's a lot of electronics involved with the newer type dishwashers. And apparently with those electronics, a dishwasher is subject to more of a end-of-life failure than what we might have seen with grandma's dishwasher. So last code cycle, dishwashers were required to be GFCI protected. In the National Electrical Code, that requirement was found in Article 210, which is titled branch circuits. For the 2020 NEC, that same requirement has been moved to where it should have been, because a dishwasher is an appliance. And so it needed to be located in Article 422 for appliances. And when it made that journey, and the GFCI requirement for a dishwasher in the IRC is right there, E3902.6 or 26.11. But in the NEC, when it made its journey from 210 to Article 422, somehow along that way, it lost the requirement that only applies to a residential dishwasher. So when you get to the 2020 NEC, it would apply to even a commercial dishwasher. Sometimes we get a little relief with GFCI protection in the form of a burial depth. You know, if this branch circuit right here under this vehicular traffic right here would probably call for like a 24-inch burial depth, but because if we go ahead and GFCI protect this branch circuit and it's rated less than 20 amperes, the code would allow us to come up to a 12-inch depth right there. Let's go ahead. Let's take our very last break. And when we come back, I'll do a little bit on AFCIs, and then we'll jump into grounding and bonding. So let's take our last break.